So you found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey there, YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here, in my full feathery glory. When last we left off, we were being told by Lantern that convergent evolution and analogous structures are apparently contradictory to convergent evolution and homology, and that both things can't exist within evolutionary biology. It was extremely dumb, and he was extremely dishonest with his use of sources. I'm expecting more of the same as we delve into a section he has titled Random Mutations, ? So, take it away, Lantern.
They have something called random mutations.
We sure do.
What they claim is that mutations are random.
Yes, in the sense that they are probabilistic at the level that we can interact with them. The degree to which the actual chemistry under the hood is random is hard to say, and we can't realistically model that in such detail as to get rid of enough uncertainty to treat mutations as non-stochastic. So yes, they are essentially random in all the ways that matter.
This is a whole list here of research showing you how mutations are not random. Let's go through some of them, right? Let's go through some of them. Them telling you themselves, not by people who are creationists who believe in evolution, yeah? This research is in nature, yeah? It's not by people who believe evolution is already true, okay?
This paper is the 1988 paper, The Origin of Mutations by John Cairns, Julie Overbaugh, and Stephen Miller. It suggests that some cells may have mechanisms for directing mutations. In the 36 years since then, those suggestions of directed mutations have been largely abandoned for lack of supporting evidence.
Research here published by Nature, okay?
Okay.
791 citations. You can go into it. It talks to you about the origins of mutations and how they're not random. How they're not random mutations, okay? That's one example.
No. It went into some data which suggested but did not demonstrate non-random mutations, although I have to say, even if some cells have a mechanism for directing their own mutations, what does this have to do with common ancestry? It certainly doesn't debunk it. In fact, it would just be another mechanism for evolution. Is the point just that the scientific consensus is wrong about this aspect of mutations? It could be, and if directed mutations get enough evidence, then that aspect of evolutionary theory will change so that it no longer is evidently wrong. Science is all about becoming less wrong.
Okay, new study, yeah? It's 2000 what?
You know, at the end of the last episode, I mentioned that not all mutations are equiprobable? This is because there are mutation hotspots and cold spots where mutations occur more or less frequency, and this itself is an evolvable trait. That's what this paper is about. It found that sequence-constrained or functional regions are relative mutational cold spots compared to non-functional regions. But which mutations actually happen within these regions is still random. So once again, we just have Lantern swallowing a pop-sci headline whole, and a headline that's not really supported in the article itself. The original paper, Mutation Bias Reflects Natural Selection in Arabidopsis thaliana, by J. Gray Monroe et al., is also rather inappropriately full of itself, claiming that epigenetic aspects of the genome that reduce the mutation rate in certain regions is a paradigm shift for the theory of evolution. Since epigenetics has been long integrated into the theory of evolution, I am rather unimpressed by this apparent paradigm shift.
2022, okay? By Harry Baker, okay? 2022. New study proves first, they claim first, but we're going to prove that now that it's not. I just showed you a research that is before it, like showing opposite to that.
The word is not proves, it's provides. Lantern is apparently of only limited literacy in English, which means he probably shouldn't be trying to do this in English with English language sources. Granted, I don't know what the state of science reporting is in Arabic, as I've never bothered to look into it, but clearly he's out of his depth both in his understanding of what science is, but also just in how to use the language he's chosen for this talk.
First evidence of non-random mutations in DNA. It's not the first, but this is the lie that they will bring for you. This is just recent research, yeah, last year.
I don't know if Harry Baker is lying about this, although he is wrong near as I can tell, but Harry Baker is also just a science reporter for Live Science. He's not one of the authors of this paper, nor is he an expert in this field. That's why going to pop-sci articles as if they were going to give you the state of the science will never work. If you really care about a topic, you need to read the actual peer-reviewed literature. And yeah, it's not the most fun thing in the world to read, but that's where the science is actually being done.
Literally, right? We're just in February, okay? What else? Let me show you this. By the way, the same research that I just showed you, which is the research of the fish, cichlid fish.
The research we were just shown wasn't about cichlids. It was about a roadside weed, a plant. Let me know in the comments, did Lantern just misspeak? Or is he actually dumb enough to not even know that the paper was about a plant and not some fish?
In that same research, they will say to you that here, I put it here, variation is not random. That they will claim to you that it's random, I already told you, it's guided. So it's not random mutation. It's not blind natural selection.
This is just a problem with the word random. You see, in its common use, it's hard to tell what someone means when they say it. Sometimes it means not a particular instance of a set. For example, if I say, reach into the hat and pull out a random slip of paper, I just mean that all the slips of paper in the hat are considered to be about the same, and your acquisition of one is irrespective of which one you get. Essentially, at least at the acquisition phase, all the slips of paper are fungible. In another sense, random can mean that all outcomes are equiprobable and none can be determined at the outset. An example of this might be the rolls of a 20-sided die in a d20 game. On average, you will roll each number on that die with the same frequency, and there is no way to know which number will come up on any given roll. Yet another example is things that are actually deterministic but are so unpredictable that they might as well be randomly determined. An example from another game is the game XCOM Enemy Unknown. In that game, your chances to hit an enemy are determined by things like range to target, cover, the skill of your soldier, and the accuracy of the weapon. But at the start of the level, a seed number is generated with a pseudo-random number generator. From that moment, all chance-based events pull from that number table which is in the background and not available to the player. The exact outcome of every possible action of the player and the computer is deterministic, but short of looking at the code running in real time, the player has no access to this. This means that while the chances displayed on screen to the player are accurate, it's already determined if that 98% chance to hit will actually miss, because the number used to see if it will is already set in stone. This is why saving before taking a shot, then reloading when you miss won't actually make you hit. The random number table for that mission is saved, and it will simply pull the same number. You, the player, have to actually perform a different action for the outcome to be different. But if you're just playing the same game in real time, it's hard to distinguish the actually deterministic process from a random process. Yet another kind of randomness is the randomness of multiple linked actions. Take, say, the roll of 3 6-sided dice. This will give you a random number from 3 to 18, but 10 and 11 are each 27 times more likely than either 3 or 18. Mutations are random in a couple ways. There are no places in the genome which cannot suffer a mutation, and there is no way to predict what that mutation will be with a high degree of accuracy. However, some places in the genome are more likely to have a mutation than others, and some kinds of mutations are more common than others. This makes it kind of like the dice rolling. You can make statistical statements about mutations, and you can predict the approximate rate, likely locations, and likely proportions of different kinds of mutation, but that's it. You can't actually go in and say for sure what mutations will occur in a particular instance. But fundamentally, this doesn't make mutations not random.
All of it is guided, it's not random, okay?
But like with the word random, it's not clear what the word guided means in this context. If you simply mean that some areas in the genome have more or fewer mutations, then sure. But if by that we mean that there is some controlling agent that directs which mutations occur where and when, then no, we do not have evidence of that. It's like the dice rolling. I'll make some rolls with 3 6-sided dice. I got 16, 13, 11, 9 twice, 8 4 times, and 6. That's 10 rolls of the dice. Now, that means that 40% of my rolls were the number 8. Does that mean that I was trying to get 8s? No, that's just what happened. Was God directing my dice to roll 8 for some reason? I guess I can't rule it out, but there's no reason to think that's what happened. On the other hand, there's a very good mathematical reason why 16 only came up once, and that the extremes of 3 and 18 are unlikely in any set of 10 rolls of 3d6. Is that guidance? Of a sort, I suppose, but not the kind that Lantern is looking for.
Let's see here, let's watch this video of Dennis Noble. Who knows what Dennis Noble is? Do you know who Dennis Noble is, Brother Sabur?
Dennis Noble is a British physiologist and psychologist.
Yeah, with Dennis Noble, before I introduce him, I just wanted to say that I actually sent him an email.
Oh good, one of the only times so far Sabur talks, and it's to tell a story that I can almost guarantee I won't care about.
Because he's really into music and this type of thing. So I said to him that, you know, here is something for you to listen to. And it's actually the call to prayer. It was actually a beautiful azan that someone did. And he was so moved by it, right?
This just in, religions have inspired great music. More at 11.
So, you know, some of these academics, they're so much into dry, boring stuff that sometimes you have to just give them, you don't even have to give them like deep dawah. I just gave him this thing and he listened to it.
Oh, did he take his shahada then and there? I'm guessing not, because being moved by music isn't really the same thing as being convinced to convert to a new religion. I quite like Byzantine and Gregorian chant. I'm not going to, for that reason, become a Catholic or Orthodox Christian. Although I guess the music wouldn't be a downside if I did either. I will say, though, that I think the best artistic expression Islam has produced is calligraphy, and I will say that Arabic calligraphy is the best calligraphy I've ever seen. Not to knock a Latin script or Chinese or Japanese calligraphy or anything, but the complexity of shape and the precision in Arabic calligraphy is amazing. And you'll note that this doesn't make me more inclined to convert to Islam, although I can say it was a factor in me studying it in college. That's right, my foreign language requirement for my degree was met by Arabic. Although, I also studied Old and Middle English, but that was part of the English requirement, not the language requirement. And yes, I've forgotten most of what I learned of Arabic. I sadly don't use it enough, although I can still usually tell if subtitles are reasonably accurate for Arabic, or if someone is just putting in their own propagandistic subtitles, which actually happens.
So anyway,
Yes.
about Dennis Noble. Dennis Noble is an anti-Darwinian evolutionist.
No, he's not. He's just an extended evolutionary synthesis guy, which is something we've already covered, but he rejects neither variation in population, sexual selection, nor natural selection, which is basically all of Darwin's contributions to the theory of evolution that have stood the test of time. He's also not a fan of reductionism and genetic determinism in biology, and he has some valid points there. But also, in my opinion, he takes his critique a bit far, and tends not to recognize that many evolutionary biologists are in fact taking into account the aspects of biology he accuses them of ignoring.
Okay, now this is hard for people to believe. Like, what on earth is an anti-Darwinian evolutionist?
It might be hard to believe, especially since there isn't really a meaningful way in which evolutionary biologists are Darwinian. That distinction hasn't really meant much since before the modern synthesis, which united Darwinians and the mutationists. Calling someone a Darwinian or an anti-Darwinian today would be like assigning American politicians to the Federalist or Anti-Federalist camp. Or for a non-American example, saying that some British politicians are Yorkist or Lancastrian.
He's basically someone that doesn't accept the modern synthesis. He doesn't accept this idea of neo-Darwinism and its many assumptions. He's actually said neo-Darwinism, in terms of most of his assumptions, has actually failed. And he is a professor at Oxford University.
Well, he's a professor emeritus, which basically means he gets money from Oxford and can affiliate himself with them, but he doesn't actually have to do anything. Professors emeriti have essentially no job requirements.
He's challenged Richard Dawkins to a debate, which he didn't actually accept.
That's because Dawkins is very much a reductionist who sees biology as being built from molecules up, whereas Noble finds more importance in the signals that are sent from the macro scales down to the molecular scale. Which is why he's not a fan of reductionism, which Dawkins largely is. But they were not about to debate natural selection or that mutations occur, or common ancestry.
Dennis Noble, from my understanding, and this is on the public record as well, he's not a Christian, he's not a Muslim, he doesn't actually believe in any religion.
I neither know nor care what religious tradition Dennis Noble aligns himself with, nor do I know or care if he does so with any such tradition.
Yet he is somebody that is well respected.
What does he mean, yet? People in scientific fields don't get respect based on their religious affiliations or lack thereof. They get respect for doing good work and making contributions to the field in which they work. Francis Collins isn't respected because he's a Christian or in spite of it. He's respected for his work in public health.
And as you pointed out, he's against this idea that random mutations, along with selection, can create the biodiversity that we actually have.
Yes, he is, and he rather stupidly pretends that that's all there is to modern evolutionary biology. But it's not. He's also quite wrong about the adaptive role and importance of things like epigenetics. But let's remember that his model is no less naturalistic than the modern theory of evolution. And even if he were right, it wouldn't help creationists a single bit. This is just like when Christian creationists talk about Alan Faduche's absurd claims that he puts forward to dispute the obvious conclusion that birds are dinosaurs. Even though, if he's right, they evolved from some other group of archosaurs that happened to be arboreal, and that made it through the end of the Triassic extinction event. It wouldn't help creationism one bit. Dennis Noble, Alan Faduche, and Richard Carrier are all in a similar position. They're fringe players in fields that don't really care all that much about what they have to say except to critique it. And while Richard Carrier isn't really used by creationists, the other two are, even though their critiques don't really help creationism one bit. Creationists citing them is a bit like a flat earther citing an electric universe proponent to show that the space is fake. It doesn't really work like that.
He considers the mechanism to be insufficient, and therefore he's pushing out the ideas like the ones that you were just speaking of.
He's right, it is insufficient. That's why things like mutual evolution, sexual selection, niche construction, etc. are all parts of evolutionary biology. But he's wrong that these things aren't taken into account, and he's also wrong about organisms passing down acquired traits beyond just epigenetic changes, which are weakly heritable.
By actually challenging the modern synthesis.
Yeah, he is challenging it, but again, not in a way that provides any aid or comfort to creationism. Even if Dennis Noble were completely right, universal common ancestry would still be true, and there would still be no place in biology for intelligent design.
And I want to say one thing very important. He still believes in evolution. That's what I want people to keep in mind.
That's right, he does. So why are we even talking about him?
We're not bringing you again. I said to you, I'm not going to bring you creationists, yeah?
Except that Lantern has already cited answers in Genesis and the Discovery Institute, so that was just a lie. I do not believe for a second that he doesn't at least recognize answers in Genesis, who of course are a bag of dicks, as a creationist source. Granted, it's not a Muslim source, but it's very much a creationist source.
So I could come and say to you, this guy is a creationist. Right? That's a well-respected academic.
That depends on who you ask.
As he said at Oxford University, taught him and made different things. He invented even certain things, right? Certain, I don't even have them now. If you just Google his name, you'll see he's inventing new things even.
I did Google him, and other than computer simulations of organs, I can't see what he invented. And I'm not positive that a computer running math on a simulated heart is an invention. It's certainly cool, though.
People are using mathematical formats and this and that. You can go into the research that he's done and all the inventions that he made. But let's listen to what he says. Yeah, let's listen to what he says. Okay.
Okay, you're about to watch a video within a video within a video.
Okay, so this is a conference that happened. It's an international conference that happened in China.
Something to note is that a conference is a place where new research is discussed that often has not actually undergone peer review, and a conference presentation is often the first time that ideas are put forward and the audience is expected to have critiques of the presentation, often quite harsh ones. That something is presented in a conference means that it's the conclusion of some research, but that research has not been put through the ringer of being judged for applicability nor appropriateness of methods, and its conclusions have not been accepted by anyone outside the research team or researcher who did the study in question. It is important to note that David Peters, a known pseudo-paleontologist and crank, once presented his idea that he found out that a pterosaur was in fact a vampire at the 63rd annual meeting of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology, held at the Museum of Science of Minnesota St. Paul, which was held on October 15th to the 18th of 2003. He was both the talk of the conference as well as the butt of many a joke there, and his conclusions were completely rejected by the world of paleontology. A conference talk means very little until after its conclusions are put through peer review and widely accepted in the field, usually because of other works managing to reproduce the work and failing to find fault in it.
Yeah, and he was speaking in that international conference. It happened in 2012, okay?
Okay.
Let's see what he says.
It's difficult, if not impossible, to find a genome change operator that is truly random in its action within the DNA of a cell. All careful studies of mutagenesis find statistically significant non-random patterns of change.
Well, first, near as I can tell, genome change operator is a term not in use in science. I have searched for the term, and it turned up nothing besides Noble's own work, and upon asking some 5 biologists, 2 of them specifically evolutionary biologists, none of them were familiar with the term. As for randomness and mutations, it depends on what he means. If by that we simply mean mutations are not all equiprobable, but have a distribution of probability of both type of mutation and place in the genome, then sure. But I don't know if that is specifically what he means. If he means that particular mutations are directed and deterministic, then no, he's just stating something that is untrue.
Okay, he says what? All research. This is not a guy that is going to come out and say something that people are going to allow him to say, yeah?
Let's look at that sentence. This is not a guy that is going to come out and say something and people are going to allow him to say, yeah. If you can figure out what that means, let me know.
I hope people to keep that in mind.
I literally can't keep it in mind, because near as I can tell, that's not a real thought. It doesn't mean anything.
He's saying all research, yeah? Put that in your mind very well, yeah? They all have patterns.
Of course they do. That's not controversial at all. It also isn't harmful to common ancestry, natural selection, sexual selection, or any other mechanism of evolution. Nor is it helpful to disputing evolution.
There is no such thing as random mutations. If an idiot comes to you, assists you, it is random mutation, then just show him that video, yeah?
Show him an out-of-context clip from a conference in which none of the terms are defined? If that's the level of Lantern's dawa, I have to wonder how the UK has a single Muslim left in it.
So there's no such thing as random mutations. Okay, let's listen to what he says, yeah? Okay.
Sure, let's listen to the remaining 19 seconds, because all this channel has uploaded is that.
So my first conclusion is this. Not only is mutation not random, that was one of the essential assumptions of the neo-Darwinian synthesis, but proteins, at least some of them, did not evolve via gradual accumulation of mutations.
Okay, he's wrong. There's a reason his ideas have not gone anywhere. They're experimentally bankrupt. There is no positive evidence for his distinctive ideas, and there is counter-evidence for them. I hate to keep saying it, but this is just the same as Christian creationists pointing to what passes for Alan Fadusa's work as if it either helped them or was a problem for the consensus view of evolution.
So he refutes what? He refutes gradual accumulation when it comes to proteins, and he refutes any idea called random mutations in the genes.
Yep.
Pro tip for Lantern, Sabor, and anyone else out there who might need to hear it. The word refute doesn't simply mean the same thing as publicly deny. If I stand at Speaker's Corner in London and loudly proclaim that there are in fact gods besides Allah and that Muhammad is not his messenger, I haven't refuted Islam. That remains true even if I have a degree in Arabic literature and the history of Islam. That remains true even if instead of doing it at Speaker's Corner, I do it at a history conference. It remains true if I do it while being a professor emeritus at Oxford. In order to actually say that Noble has refuted something, you have to actually give his arguments and evidence in support of that refutation.
So there is no such thing as random mutation.
Boy, was I wrong.
And as I said to you, any idiot comes to you and says to you there's random mutations, he's an idiot who did not study the research. And I put for you already links here, yeah? You don't believe me? I just put you four links.
Imagine being Lantern, the man who will with a straight face tell you he's not providing creationist sources, while on his links is answers to Genesis, and who thinks that mutational hotspots mean that mutations can't be random, and thinking someone else is an idiot. Will wonders never cease?
A couple of them are from, one of them is from Life Science, a couple of them from Nature. These are all accepted scientific magazines. All of them are of people who support evolution.
Yeah, and they don't generally say what Lantern thinks they do, because he doesn't know the first thing about genetics or evolution, or even, it would appear, the mathematical concepts undergirding what we colloquially bunch together under the term random.
Okay? It's not from creationists, okay? Now, the question is that, directed by who?
No one. In every case that he has mentioned, any direction that exists is by the environment, not a conscious agent. Even Noble provides no reason to think Allah is directing anything in biology.
Would they ever say directed by God?
I don't know. I tend not to know the religious positions or affiliations of scientists, because I don't care about it. And most scientists don't tend to talk about it in their public work, because it doesn't matter.
That's an impossibility in the scientific field. So what do they say? It's actually directed by cells. In the first research I showed to you here, that I said to you by Nature, the first one, they claim it's actually the cells are smart and intelligent, and these.
And you think Lantern is going to provide evidence that would tend to refute the claim that the cells are directing their own mutations? I doubt it. Even though it's right there in the Luria-Delbruck experiment. An experiment from about 8 decades ago in which the hypothesis of induced mutations in response to environmental stimulus was tested directly. You see, if organisms mutate to better survive a new environment, then if you take a group of essentially identical bacteria and introduce them to an antibiotic-rich environment in separate populations, then each population should induce resistance mutations in about the same proportion as each other population if mutations are induced. If they are in fact not deterministic and generally not induced by the cells in response to environmental stresses, then each population should have a somewhat random, within a constrained range, level of resistance to the antibiotics. Of course, when this experiment is run today, and was run originally, the bacteria have an essentially random distribution of resistance to antibiotics.
That's how, prior to their creation, they already had these codes.
The creation of these cells, as such, is in fact the point Lantern is trying to argue for, but he is now using it as a premise in an argument for their creation. That's textbook question begging.
Of how to be organized, and they started functioning on them after their creation.
Citation needed.
What an idiotic thing to say.
A phrase that would describe more or less everything I have ever heard from Lantern's mouth. Also, this absurd projection is making me lose what little charity I had left for this clown.
Some others will say to you, it's microbes, actually. And they've invented a new term called microbial intelligence. You know what?
Well, first, it's microbial, not microbical, because that's not a word. Again, Lantern calling people stupid while being unable to read is quite rich. And I haven't pointed it out, but there have been numerous misspellings in his slides. Anyway, what is this microbial intelligence paper? It's Bacterial Intelligence, Imitation Games, Time-Sharing, and Long-Range Quantum Coherence by Sangram Mujamdar and Sukla Pal, published in the Journal of Cell Communication and Signaling, the 17th of May, 2017. It is an extremely poorly written article that seems to have a level of skill in English that rivals Lantern's own, but essentially it says that bacteria can communicate through electrochemical means over large distances relative to their size. It also talks about the possibility of constructing an artificial lifelike cell that could participate in this community in a way that the bacteria would react to as if it were simply any other bacterial cell in their population. It has absolutely nothing to do with the extended evolutionary synthesis, natural selection, mutation inducement, or anything else that is relevant to this topic.
These microbes are intelligent and they know how to have these mutations. These mutations happening because microbes are smart.
None of which is the source Lantern is citing, because remember, Lantern is an idiot who's probably also a liar. He can't tell what that paper is about, and if he could, he'd lie about it anyway.
Another research says to you, oh, by nature, it's bacteria. Bacteria is intelligent, and we've got intelligent bacteria, and that's how it's guided.
The paper is Memory and Modularity in Cell-Fate Decision-Making by Thomas M. Norman et al., published in Nature on November 20th, 2013, and it is about the mechanisms that cause some bacteria to be free-living and motile, while others of the same species and in the same environment formated chains that cause the buildup of biofilm. It's not about mutations, and the only genetics involved in the paper is elucidating the genetic pathways responsible for joining a chain, and the separate pathways that induce a bacterium to stay in the chain or break away. There's nothing about the bacteria inducing mutations in response to the environment or anything else. The word mutation only even appears 3 times in the paper, and it is each time talking about the fact that the experimenters themselves introduced a mutation to the flagellum to lower the bacterial mobility. I find it hard to believe that Lantern both read and understood this paper when he decided that it supported his contention of God-induced adaptive mutations.
What kind of... Who buys these things?
No one, because Lantern is just lying about what these papers are saying and expecting his audience to not actually check up on the papers. In other words, he thinks you're even stupider than he is. He's giving Nathaniel Jeanson a run for his money in terms of disdain for the intelligence of his audience.
Who literally listens to this nonsense and says the evolution is true?
Well, it depends on what the alleged nonsense is. If it's what actually is contained in those papers, then it's neither nonsense nor is it about inducing mutations. So I have no idea why these papers should impact one's acceptance of evolution either way.
Let's move into the genes now, yeah?
Sure, let's move on after Lantern fails to even attempt to argue that the guiding force behind these mutations is in fact Allah.
Let's go to the pool of the genes. We already spoke about random mutations and how it doesn't exist. Let's go a little bit to some research talking about genes and genetic similarities. This research I put here, right, which is by the National Library of Medicine.gov, right, well accepted. There is no doubt about it. Everyone hears about it. 98.8% identical between human and chimpanzees.
Specifically in alignable coding regions. When the full genome is used, depending on techniques, it is a bit lower, but not by much. But the important thing for the idea of human evolution and the place of humans in the tree of life is that humans are genetically closer to members of genus Pan, that is chimpanzees and bonobos, than they are to anything else. That means you, listening to this, presuming you're a human, have more in common with a given chimp than that chimp has with every gorilla alive. This means that in addition to having all the morphological characteristics of an ape, humans are genetically nestled right inside the family Hominidae, next to chimps and a bit farther from gorillas and yet still farther from orangutans, with the gibbons of family Hylobatidae being yet farther still.
Everyone hears this research, right or wrong. If you speak to anyone in the basic, even laymen, if you go to them and you say to them that they're 99 or 98, they'll all say to you, yeah, they're 98 or 99% identical.
Yes, as far as I know, it's a reasonably well-known fact about science, although I doubt most people could tell you how this comparison was made or how it works.
The question is now, are humans and chimpanzees actually 98.8% identical? Is that claim true?
Yes, as long as you understand what's being compared. I'll use the Quran as an example. Suppose I find a codex in the basement of some 12th century mosque in North Africa. And while not itself a copy of the Quran, it contains the entirety of Surat 1, 5-7, 78-85, and 112. But in each, except perhaps the first and last, there are a few variations in pointing and even in the rasm, or shape of the letters, which is more significant in ways that you'll understand if you're familiar with Arabic. But just know that it's rather more significant than the pointing. But I compare these Quranic sections to a modern edition and find that the pointing matches 98% with a modern Egyptian Quran and the rasm matches 99%. I can say without any dishonesty that the similarity between the Quranic texts I found and the modern Quran is about 99.5%. But also, it's important to note that much of the Quran wasn't found in my fancy codex, so it wasn't included in the count. There's no identity match for, say, Surat al-Baqarah or Surat al-Nisa. Similarly, this 99.8% match didn't even look at some parts of the DNA. And this fact isn't being hidden, it's just part of the science that most people who aren't giant nerds aren't too interested in. And yes, I am indeed switching from Bible analogies to Quranic analogies, specifically because the speakers here are Muslims, not Christians.
Now, how do we understand this? By going into the methodology that these people use to come up with this conclusion of 98.8 identical.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I'm kind of surprised Lantern got this one. We absolutely need to look into how this number was arrived at in order to see what exactly it means.
Now, and I want people to pay close attention with me. Yes.
Can
go
I
ahead.
can I just say something just before we get into that? I just want everybody watching to just be aware of something,
Let's hope the something is interesting and not stupid.
which is super important. Muhammad's going to go over the reasons why the comparison of 98% is misleading and is lying by omission, and this is well known and established. However,
So yeah, it's stupid. Great. By the way, the paper Lantern is referencing is in line with the 98 to 99% similarity.
I want to give a counterfactual. What if it's not 98.8%? What if it's 100%, right? Or 99.999%, and they're not wrong?
Then humans would just be the same thing as chimpanzees. Because this is just asking, what if humans and chimps had no more difference between them than humans have with other humans? Well, that'd make them the same species, and they also shouldn't really have a very different morphology.
Similarities in of themselves do not prove anything.
Right, that's why we have a theoretical framework, so we can make predictions and interpret data in a way that's useful and makes it meaningful. The whole point of a theory is to explain otherwise disconnected data points and to make predictions about future data of that kind. On their own, any of the datasets that go into making a theory don't prove the theory. Science works on the basis of correlating many sets of data and points of fact. Similarly, on its own, the fact that apples fall doesn't prove that gravity exists. Also, the fact that the planets orbit doesn't prove gravity exists. But you put them together into a theoretical framework, and suddenly a single equation ends up explaining both as well as other phenomena, such as the attraction of mass to other masses in the Cavendish experiment. Evolution works the same way. No one fact or set of data demonstrates it on its own.
You need a transformation being done by a mechanism, and you need the origination probability being close to zero. Without these two things, even if the similarity was even closer than 98.8%, it would make no difference to the claim between human-chimp ancestry being true or it actually being false, because you need the background information to do that. So just as the upshot of what I'm saying is, similarities simply mean similarities. They don't mean anything else unless you have background assumptions.
That made absolutely no sense. Let's try that again.
You need a transformation being done by a mechanism.
What transformation? Does he mean the evolution that occurred from the common ancestor of humans and chimps until the two species exist as they are today? Well, if so, we have all the mechanisms we need to explain it, but there may have been more in operation that we don't know about.
And you need the origination probability being close to zero.
The origination probability? What the actual does that mean? Neither I nor the internet seems to be familiar with this phrase. I think Sabor probably means something when he says it, but I can't really imagine what. If you think you know, put it in the comments.
Without these two things, even if the similarity was even closer than 98.8%, it would make no difference to the claim between human-chimp ancestry being true or it actually being false.
Do we have these things, whatever they are, when we do paternity tests? Because the idea behind paternity tests and these tests is basically the same. DNA is what's passed down through sperm and egg through the generations. The same way DNA can help you track down your relatives on a genealogy website, it can help you track down your relatives in an evolutionary tree. There's no reason for organisms to share things like neutral mutations in a nested hierarchy unless they're related by common ancestry. Humans and chimps are so linked, as they are to the rest of the great apes. Then the rest of primates, then to the colugos, then the rodents and lagomorphs.
Because you need the background information to do that. So just as the upshot of what I'm saying is, similarities simply mean similarities. They don't mean anything else unless you have background assumptions.
Okay, well, my background assumption is that DNA is the molecule of inheritance in genetics. That seems reasonable, and it leads me pretty firmly to the conclusion that humans and chimps share a fairly recent common ancestor, if we think of recency in geological terms.
Absolutely. And as a simple example I make to that guy, all iPhones look the same. They're from the same manufacturer. This is just because two things are identical does not change this idea that we don't want to go into specific details. Let's go to the genes now. Let's talk about the genes. Okay.
So much of this video has been me absolutely failing to understand what the idea Lantern even is. I don't think it's an English problem. He can clearly produce grammatical sentences in English, and his vocabulary seems decent. I honestly think that Lantern is just profoundly stupid. Like, I think he might fail that dementia test that a certain disgraced former president of the United States likes to brag about having passed. You know, the one where you find out if you know what an elephant and a cobra is, or if you know the alphabet, or can draw a clock. It's hard for me to understand how Lantern can be just so incoherent. I suspect he's drunk off his ass, except he's not slurring, and I suspect he doesn't drink, as that's a no-no in Islam. Also, remember everyone, this was the best that I have ever found when looking for Islamic anti-evolution content. Most of it is far, far worse, which is odd because on other topics I don't find Islamic apologists to be this incoherent. Whether you like the argument or not, I've heard them very clearly articulate the Kalam cosmological argument for the existence of a creator, but when it comes to evolution, for some reason, so many of them just turn into gibbering idiots that make Kent Hovind look like some kind of hypergenius. One group of people that really are hypergeniuses, though, are my subscribers. So if you want to be smarter than Lantern and can even comprehend, why not subscribe to the channel? Make sure you like the video too, and while you're down there, under the video, ensure that you have notifications turned on so you always know when I have more videos for you.
So, in that research, why is that research highly problematic?
Because it provides evidence for things that are true, but that Sabor and Lantern don't want to be true.
Or sorry, why is that conclusion highly problematic?
Yeah, see, I was right. The problem is that they don't like the conclusions of science. And I just looked at how much was left of this video, and I might have wanted to cry a bit. If this video kills me, in lieu of flowers, please send Sabor and Ahmad just so much whiskey. Nope, I'm kidding, please don't send Sabor or Lantern anything. That would be harassment unless they've specifically asked for those things to be sent to them.
I'm going to go into details now. First, you can open a book. It's called Bioinformatics and Functional Genomics. This is what is taught in universities.
Wait, did I just read that damn human and chimp genomic analysis paper for no reason? What the hell, man? Fine. Whatever. Let's go on to the source I can't actually check easily. That's no problem. I'm sure Lantern won't misrepresent it given how fairly he's treated all of his sources so far. For those of you who are bad at interpreting tone, that was sarcasm.
Right? I'm not bringing you my own thing. This is what is taught in universities.
Lantern has frequently expressed the sentiment that he's just presenting the science as it is done and taught, but then getting it badly wrong. To me, now, when I hear him say things like this, I interpret it as, I'm about to lie to you and pretend that an absurd straw man is actually the scientific consensus.
If you go to the third edition, if you go to the third chapter, introduction, someone says, I'm making this up, I'm giving you the reference, okay? They say that two genes or proteins are homologous if they evolved from a common ancestor. So they say that they are homologous if we accept the assumption that they evolved from a common ancestor.
No, that's not an assumption, that's a condition. Here's another example. If there is coffee, I will put sugar in it. Am I assuming that there is coffee? No, I am not.
That's what the book is saying, okay?
No, it's not okay, because that's not how those words work.
Now, when you go under the same book, there's a section called scoring metrics. The scoring metrics that they use in those studies. They say most database searching methods, such as BLAST, HMMMER, there's many difference, depend in some form on the evolutionary insight of the Day-Hoff model. So they're saying to you, the systems that they're using to look for those similarities already assumes the evolution is true.
So evidently Lantern doesn't know what scoring a matrix means. If you have a matrix, you have already identified the similarities and differences, because in this matrix you'll have a number of traits or genetic markers that organisms can have or not have, or in some cases, have to some degree. The scoring is using math to determine the most likely relationship between the organisms. And yeah, when you're trying to establish the likely evolutionary relationship between organisms, you assume there is one. How else could you do it? I think part of this is the common but silly idea among creationists that scientists are still trying to demonstrate evolution. We're long past that. It's just like when flat earthers complain that NASA isn't doing enough to demonstrate that the Earth is round. They aren't trying to, because there is no reason to. It's a fact that has been established for so long that there's no point in trying. Similarly, chemists aren't going around and writing papers to demonstrate that oxygen is what makes fire burn, and geologists aren't going around trying to show that basalt forms from lava. Evolution has long since met the burden of evidence to be accepted in science, and now the questions being asked are along the lines of what does the pattern of ancestry look like, not is there such a pattern. That a theory is so well established that no one is really looking to demonstrate its validity is not an argument against that validity, but for it. It means that it has been largely unassailable for so long that no one even bothers trying anymore, except perhaps around the fringes by adding things to it like epigenetics and endosymbiosis.
already assumes you and the chimpanzee are from common ancestors.
Yes, because universal common ancestry has long ago been demonstrated. So then there's a question of which animals are most closely related to chimps and humans. Let's make a comparison to Islam. In historical scholarship, the exact way in which the Quran took its current form is an open question. There is unfortunately a known event in which the manuscripts were rounded up and destroyed in favor of a standardized version, meaning that unlike with biblical texts, we don't have a series of manuscript families from which to work to reconstruct the original. And also, references from early in Islamic history are a bit confusing, with what are now parts of the Quran sometimes being referenced as separate works, and some parts of it being considered prayers that aren't part of the corpus itself, such as Surah 1 or Surat al-Fatiha. So let's say that Lantern and Sabor are engaged in this discussion from the standard Islamic view that the Quran, as we have it, was revealed to Muhammad, variously written down on palm leaves and bits of parchment by his followers, then collected, then finally turned into the definitive edition promulgated by Caliph Uthman. If I come in and say, but you were assuming that Arabic was a language that existed at the time of the 7th century, I would be laughed right out of the room. The existence of Arabic as a language has been attested from at least the time of the Nabateans, some 3 centuries before Muhammad's life. The existence of Arabic in this discussion is a background assumption. Not because we have no evidence, but just want it to be true so we can talk about the Quran, but because we have long-standing and overwhelming evidence of the existence of Arabic in various inscriptions from before the earliest plausible date for the composition of the Quran. As a result, no one really tries to establish the existence of Arabic in the 7th century in serious scholarship. That's the situation with universal common ancestry. The evidence is long-standing and overwhelming, so we're past the point of trying to demonstrate it. But even so, just because anti-evolutionists exist, people do it anyway for funsies. One of my favorite examples is Statistical Evidence for Common Ancestry, Application to Primates, published in the journal Evolution in June 2016 by David A. Baum et al. Here, they did not assume common ancestry. Instead, they had both models for common ancestry and separate ancestry for primates. It demonstrated with p-values like 1 times 10 to the negative 1,791st power that common ancestry is supported even when you don't assume it. For those of you who are not familiar with a p-value, it means that in one of their datasets, the chances of separate ancestry being true given their data is about 0.1789 zeros, then 1%. So yeah, it's pretty damn well established.
Already assumes that your genes are homologous. Before doing the search, it already assumes.
Nope, this is work that is done after we've already established the fact of common ancestry. Science has moved on.
So it moves from humans and chimpanzees are homologous if we consider them from a common ancestor to humans and chimpanzees are homologous, therefore they are from a common ancestor.
Again, homology isn't something that applies to entire organisms. It applies to parts of organisms. Lantern has the understanding of this topic that I might expect from a 10-year-old. Genes can be homologous, proteins can be homologous, organs can be homologous, but chimpanzees and humans can't be called homologous. They have homologous traits and structures. If you want to try to overturn some well-established idea in science, you have to actually know what you're talking about. If you asked me about why your car is making a weird noise and I said that it probably had run out of carburetor padlocks because you're overclocking your accelerometer, you'd probably assume that I had no clue what I'm talking about. That's what Lantern sounds like.
The same idea of the circle reasons that I displayed area when it comes to the vestigial, or the same type of nonsensical things.
I had to listen to that 3 times. I think he's just complaining again that he sees this as circular, but it's not. I've already gone over this. I don't feel like doing it again. Just go watch the previous videos, unless you're watching this as a supercut, in which case, I guess go back to earlier in the video. Also, if you're watching this as a supercut, I salute you, because this is one long video.
This is a bit confusing, but I will explain it when I go into the research. I'll give an example.
No, they rely on research that already demonstrated universal common ancestry to the satisfaction of the entire field, and then they do research to answer still unanswered questions within that paradigm. There's basically no one trying to demonstrate universal common ancestry anymore.
Point is, it's no longer an assumption, it's evidence. They already assume that it is the case before they do the research. Rather than doing the research to come to the conclusion that it is true or not, they already assume it's true, and they use the methods that assumes it's true to prove what they already believe.
And he's doing a jahannam of a bad job making that point.
That's the point that I'm trying to make.
Lantern is apparently unfamiliar with the concept of statistical sampling. It doesn't matter that your sample isn't as big as your population, as long as the sample is sufficiently large and unbiased. If you wanted to find out the average mass of a US 1-cent coin, commonly called a penny, You don't need to measure every single penny. I just need enough pennies with enough variation in origin and weight. The chances are that if I measure 140 million of the approximately 140 billion pennies currently in circulation, I am damn sure I will have a plenty good enough sample. Hell, I am very confident that if I measured 1,400 pennies, that would be fine. Sampling 0.1% of your population is overkill in most situations that don't involve a very small population.
Okay, so in this study, why was it problematic? First, they used 3 million genes out of 3 billion.
Yep, a perfectly acceptable sample for such a large population. The chances of a random sample of that population being wildly different from the results of a full population measurement are both measurable and minuscule. I'm sorry that Lantern doesn't understand statistics, but his lack of understanding isn't a problem for science, it's a problem for him.
So literally 1 out of 1,000 genetic codes only in that research.
No, they tossed out unalignable regions, because the study is about alignable regions. That's not a secret, and the fact that Lantern doesn't know what that means is still not a problem with the study.
Now, within 1 out of 1,000 in that research that they use, they ignored 28% differences and 7% differences.
No, it means that of their samples, that percent wasn't alignable. And this isn't simply because of differences in the human and chimp genome, it's because in part bacteria were used in the replication of chimp DNA. Because this used an actual sample from a chimpanzee, not a reference genome, which means that very short alignments may be due to chimerism and not actually because of low similarity with the sample chimp and the reference human genome. Now, you might say that that's not a great method of generating your sample DNA, and okay, there are now high-quality chimp reference genomes, and those have also been used in similar studies with similar results. Personally, I would be more interested in using a reference genome or a genome sampled after abiotic methods of cloning the genome for sequencing, but I didn't choose this particular paper, Lantern did. So if there are problems he has with the methods, he could have picked a different paper.
Between humans and chimpanzees, which is actually 35%. So if we were to take that 35%, it's why 65% similarities now already.
Which is 0.1%.
And given the fact that we only taken 3%, 3 million out of 3 billion.
No, they're taking a representative sample. That's a thing that happens in basically all fields of science. It also happens in industry. For example, factories have QA departments that are in charge of making sure that the factory isn't shipping defective product, because that's how you get returns and lose business. So do you think the QA personnel check every single item that comes off the factory floor? Of course not. They don't have the time or numbers for that. Instead, they sample each batch to see what problems a particular batch may have. If the number and severity of the problems is low, they ship the batch. If there are problems, then they will either not ship or recall the batch. Statistical sampling is done in both science and industry for a simple reason. It works. The math isn't lying to you.
Of the genetic codes. So first, they're ignoring majority of the genes, number one.
No, it's not what they don't like. It's a combination of that which they are not attempting to measure, along with parts of the sample they have good reason to think are actually not representative. To continue my penny example, if during my measurement of the mass of pennies I notice one with a couple maple leaves on one side and a picture of a young Queen Elizabeth on the other side, I'd probably throw that one out. Not because I don't like Canadian coins, but because that's not what I'm trying to measure. Similarly, if I found a coin that was silvery and had Franklin D. Roosevelt on it rather than Abraham Lincoln, I'd toss that out of my sample too. Again, not because I hate 10-cent coins, but because that's not what I'm measuring.
Number two, they're excluding that which they don't like, which is 28% and 7 differences.
Analysis was restricted to alignments with greater than or equal to 60 compared bases, chimpanzee clones carrying greater than or equal to 60 consecutive unaligned bases, in addition to an aligned segment, were judged to be potentially chimeric. To identify the human counterpart of the unaligned sequence part, lower-ranking alignments were analyzed. In cases where alignments of two sequences of a potentially chimeric clone shared greater than 10 identical base pairs, the entire clone was excluded from further analysis. To further avoid sequences that display multiple matches to the human genome, the alignment scores were compared with the scores of the second best alignment in each case. Only when the difference between the scores was greater than or equal to 10 were the alignments used for further analysis. To minimize the influence of potentially undetected non-orthologous comparisons and the sequence comparisons, we included 2.5% of the alignments with the highest extent of sequence differences from the analysis. This corresponds to a threshold of 96% in the sequence similarity. When lowered to 95%, 1.7% of all alignments are excluded, and the mean chimpanzee-human sequence difference changes from 1.25 to 1.27. What part of that was, we didn't like it? It was no part of it. Which part of it was comprehensible to Lantern? Also probably no part of it.
And they say in the same study why they excluded it. They say we excluded it because there's no similarities. Oh, you don't say.
Correct. They don't say that.
You know, so that which is not similar you ignore, and you bring that which is similar and you claim that there's identicality 98.8.
You know, BLAST is freely available, as are referenced human and chimp genomes. Lantern could simply run the test himself after learning to use the program. Of course, if he did, he'd find that the conventional similarity numbers are what he gets, because they're what basically everyone gets but Tompkins, and he's the creationist who couldn't pass an 8th grade algebra test, so I tend not to trust his numbers.
And now they do this beautiful, very beautiful, nice things that they call deletion, substitution, and insertion.
What does he mean by they do these things? Those are types of mutations, not things that researchers were doing. I still cannot get over how obvious it is that Lantern doesn't understand this paper in the least. It's like we're at 5,000 millihovens.
And in every, it is between 1 to 65 codes in the sequence.
That is not a sentence that means anything. I know all those words, but in that order, they don't form a coherent thought.
That they will do deletion, substitution, and insertion in. And I will explain what deletion, substitution, and insertion in. We're going to go into that, okay?
No, it's not okay, because apparently Lantern doesn't know that those are kinds of mutations, not operations that researchers are performing. This is like complaining about your mechanic because he keeps doing transmission fluid. It doesn't make any sense.
And I want to say I want to make a very important point. Here, the research that I put in Scientific American, if you just search hidden treasures in junk DNA.
Hidden treasures in junk DNA. Okay, sure. I'm not going to go Google it just yet, because I suspect I won't have to.
Right? They used to have this stupid belief that there's something called junk DNA and it's useless and all of that. Richard Dawkins and these people were talking about it.
Junk DNA is very much a thing. Rather than go through all of this myself, why not check out the video Bad Creationist Genetics No Junk DNA by Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal of the channel Creation Myths. It's far more thorough than I'm willing to be this far into a video series about a guy who seems to understand what he's talking about less than Matthew Rahmat Nyler does.
And today we know this is nonsense.
You can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious!
And all types of genes are useful and important for the human being, okay?
Okay, but if it's a gene, it's not junk DNA. Those are mutually exclusive categories. Genes are specific parts of the genome. They're the parts that encode the nucleotide sequence, which is then transcribed into RNA, and read by ribosomes to produce proteins. Yes, I skipped a bunch of steps there for the sake of the soul of wit. Something Billy Shakespeare talked about.
Now, the important thing is this, is that changing one gene, one genetic code in certain situation can be fatal. You can die.
I mean, yeah, some small mutations are fatal. Those are the ones that tend not to be passed down. But also, most mutations aren't fatal. Also, what the heck does Lantern think a genetic code is? He seems to mean nucleotide base pair, but that's a really dumb way to express that concept. And he's so monumentally stupid that I hesitate to even propose a potentially rational meaning. I feel like if you played Lantern in Call of Cthulhu, he'd basically never take more than the minimum sanity damage, because intelligence score would be like a 12, and he simply can't actually comprehend the terrible truths of the universe. He's like the epitome of head empty, no thoughts.
Now, the point is they're claiming thousands, if not millions, of changes in these studies, but they ignore them. They do insertion, deletion, substitution. They ignore all of these different things, right?
No, that's not right. That's exactly why there are differences between the human and the chimp genomes. Those are 3 kinds of mutation, and when they occur, they cause genomes to differ. If they were to ignore these, then it would mean they would, rather than doing the study, just write that humans and chimps have the same genome, and go home under the impression that humans and chimps are exactly the same thing.
And they substitute, literally, they change, they delete certain genetic codes. They delete them. Even though, as I said to you, one of them can be fatal. They delete them in order for them to push this narrative that is actually 98.8% identical. Okay?
I don't even know what the claim is. Is he saying that researchers were deleting nucleotides from their samples in order to push a bogus similarity? Is he saying that they mutated their own children with fatal genetic diseases somehow? What the heck is even happening right now? Usually with creationists, I at least understand the point they're trying to make, even if it's usually extremely stupid. This is just actual word salad. Lantern doesn't understand any of the terms here.
So this is the nonsense that they do to come up to this conclusion, 98.8. Is that it? No.
I don't even know what that was, so I guess it's good that it wasn't.
Right? What they did in that study, they ignored all the insertion and deletion that they did.
Okay, look, I'm going to go ahead and look at the rest of this genetics similarity talk, and if it stays completely incomprehensible, I'm going to skip past the rest of it. There's nothing for me to talk about when the person I'm responding to won't even be coherent at a basic level. But also, before I go, remember that Lantern said he wasn't going to bring any creationist sources, but his last source on his current slide is from the Institute for Creation Research, which, as you might know or be able to infer from the name, is a creationist organization. Good to know he remains a liar.
Proceeding on the crudely conceived idea of an instrument that would not only provide inverse reactive current for use in unilateral phase detractors, but would also be capable of automatically synchronizing cardinal gram meters. Such an instrument comprised of Dodge gears and bearings, Reliant electric motors, Allen Bradley controls, and all monitored by Rockwell software is Rockwell Automation's retrocalculator.
Okay, so the rest of that was him continuing to not understand that deletions, substitutions, and insertions are mutations. Him not understanding what it means to construct a hypothetical ancestral genome, and then complaining that when people measure different things about the genome, they get different percent identity numbers. I see no point in doing a point-by-point refutation, given that this guy doesn't even know what mutations are. We're cutting back in with Sabor giving his own take on this whole genetics thing.
No. The point that you're raising here, I think, because some people, they'll look at these particular pictures, they'll look at the insertions and the deletions and the different numbers you're going over, and they'll get confused.
Well, that's certainly true, although perhaps not for the reason that Sabor thinks.
But I think a way to summarize it is they are subjective in how they come to their conclusions.
Yeah, nothing says subjectivity like data tables and statistical analysis.
They can pick and choose what they want, and because of that, that's why you have all these discrepancy.
That's an interesting hypothesis. You know, there are in fact statistical techniques that can be used to uncover biased reporting in data. Additionally, Sabor could just download the necessary programs and files to run his own comparison and publish a critique if he finds that the work of others is wrong. But no, that would require him to actually know what he's talking about. It's so much easier to just go live on YouTube and pretend to know more than all the people who have spent nearly their entire adult lives doing nothing but being engrossed in genetics.
And even if these discrepancies...
Sabor, not just pick and choose, they change.
Shut the f*** up, Mo. You have no clue what the f*** you're opening your cock holster about. You are by far the dumbest person I've ever featured on this channel, and I responded to goddamn Roger from Mud Fossil U, the guy who thinks caves are fossilized vaginas. Just let Sabor talk. At least he doesn't bray like a hyena on cocaine every time he thinks he made a point.
Yeah,
it's super important, and what we have to realize about whenever it comes to any comparison between the human genome and the chimpanzee genome, the scientist who's studying the human genome and the chimpanzee genome, and they're doing the studies, take the names of each one of these scientists who are putting together these papers and interview them before, let's just say hypothetically, before they did the experiments, and ask them, do you believe in human chimpanzee history? Every single one of them will say yes. So the thing is, it's a foregone conclusion.
So now, scientists confirming a prediction is a bad thing. Let's look at a little story. The story of the discovery of Neptune. You see, Newtonian mechanics had long been established as the paradigm used for calculating things like the orbits of planets and moons, and predicting where such objects would be in the sky in the future. But there was a bit of a problem. People like Alexis Bouvard noticed that Uranus wasn't acting as expected. So Urbain Le Verrier and John Couch Adams both did some calculations and found that the oddities in Uranus's orbit could be accounted for if there were another fairly large planet beyond its orbit. They even calculated where it should be in the sky if it existed. Then John Gale received a letter from Le Verrier asking him to look at a particular part of the sky. 12 degrees from the predicted location, there it was. So the people predicting the location of Neptune thought it was real. Does this mean that they're not allowed to do research that shows that they were right? It seems like, according to Sabor, maybe so. And perhaps we now have reason to doubt the existence of Neptune. But hey, maybe that's too far from evolution to count as a good example. Let's look at another discovery, that of Tiktaalik. Paleontologist Neil Shubin and his colleagues, Dashler and Jenkins, were hoping to find a transitional form between basostegocephalian fish and tetrapods. They knew from the theory of evolution that such an organism would have lived in or around the late Devonian, and it should have lived in a mixed environment with land and water. So they looked at geological survey maps and found that Ellesmere Island in far northern Canada had rocks of the right age and environment. Now, Ellesmere Island is deep into the Arctic, and digging there is only possible for a small part of the year. So progress was slow, but after 5 years, they found exactly what they were looking for, and it met the predictions of evolutionary biologists who were studying the origin of tetrapods, such as the aforementioned Daschler. So is it suspicious that a team who thought something like Tiktaalik would be found actually found it? No, of course not. Confirmed predictions are, as we often hear from creationists, the gold standard in science. That the chimp human genetic analysis confirmed predictions based on evolutionary theory is another in the myriad of confirmations of evolutionary theory, not a problem or a conspiracy.
They already believe it. And it's just about fitting the data to make it appear that the similarity is less or more than they previously thought.
That's an accusation of data manipulation. A serious accusation, but one that can be demonstrated. Reference genomes for both Homo sapiens and Pan-troglodytes are in the public domain, and genome comparison programs are free. If Sabor's computer can't handle a full genome comparison, which is likely as the files are very large, he could simply split it up into chromosome comparisons. But I'll give a spoiler warning. The only person who's managed to come up with numbers significantly different from the consensus while doing it this way is Jeffrey Tompkins, who in fact demonstrably did things that would be considered data manipulation, except that Tompkins struggles with 8th grade math, so he might actually just be that stupid. Let me know in the comments how likely you think it is that Sabor will ever go ahead and demonstrate his claim of data manipulation by just doing the work.
So
Absolutely.
no one's, and this is super important, brothers and sisters. Nobody's coming to the evidence from a perspectiveless perspective. They already have it clear in their head that universal common ancestry is true.
Yes, just like the Verrier thought that universal gravitation was true. Science is done by humans, and humans have biases. That's why there's this thing called peer review. Sabor is welcome to actually peer review these genetic studies by doing his own.
And therefore, they are not objectively coming to this data. They are simply coming to it with their what's known as theory ladenness in philosophy of science. And that's why these conclusions are absurd.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
Just put up or shut up. Do the work. That's what real scientists do. They do the work. Creationists, though, don't. They just LARP at science. Their researchers are doing research the way a warrior going into battle wearing painted cardboard armor and carrying a plastic rod covered in foam is going into battle. And it's because their distinctive ideas simply do not hold up to scrutiny.
They're simply absurd.
That's what they're taught in universities, Brother Sabor.
Yeah.
They're already taught as students. It is. That's what I'm saying. Why am I building up with all of that? Because they're already told this is a reality, this is a fact.
Imagine people being taught that verifiable facts are facts in college. The horror!
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
Look, that something is taught in colleges and universities is not proof that it's true. Many things that were long taught in such places have now been overturned. But they weren't overturned by people whining about bias. They were overturned by people actually doing the work, getting the data, and shifting the consensus of an academic field of study. Creationists are welcome to do so, but the problem is, they can't. They generally don't even try.
So whatever method they use, that's why I opened their own textbooks and what they teach in their own universities, is they already use these methods. If you open this research I showed you, they use BLAT. If you open a science research with the same exact percentage, but different types of genes, they apply the same method, but they're also using BLAST. Again, they're using all of these different methods that already assume the truth of evolution.
BLAST doesn't assume the truth of evolution. It just compares one dataset to another and spits out similarity statistics about them. You could feed it actual random noise for both the query and database genomes, which would not share a common ancestor with anything, let alone each other. And it will spit back stats giving you a percent identity. In order to take the output of BLAST and make it meaningful in the context of evolutionary biology, you have to make some kind of prediction and test it. BLAST can be your way of testing it, but it on its own does not assume anything. It's simply some mathematical operations performed on datasets.
And they add all of these different data. Like, for example, to simplify very simply to any layman, if I say Muhammad ate camel meat.
That seems likely. It was a common food when and where he lived.
What they would do is that because they want these two statements to be identical, Muhammad ate camel meat, camel ate Muhammad meat.
What the hell is he talking about? I have no idea how this is supposed to track onto genetic studies as an analogy.
They want these two statements to be identical. So what they're going to do is they're going to change camel with Muhammad in the position, and they're going to do substitution, and they will change the positions, or they will do a deletion of Muhammad. They will put camel in there, and do a deletion of the other camel, and they put Muhammad in there to come up with the same conclusion.
Oh, it doesn't track because Lantern doesn't know what the hell he's talking about and still thinks that a reconstructed ancestral genome is made by data manipulation, and he thinks that mutations are things that researchers do to the data rather than things that happen to genomes which can be found by researchers. He fundamentally has no clue what is happening. He doesn't know what the genes are, he doesn't know what the term genetic code means, he doesn't know what nucleotide base pairs are, he doesn't know what junk DNA is, and he hasn't even mentioned things like introns or regulatory regions. As a result, his critiques are almost impossible to even parse. See what I mean? Completely incoherent.
Muhammad A. Kamali and Kamali A. Bahawani is complete opposite, right? But they will do these methods now to simplify, very simple for the people, right? Rather than doing all of this, they will do substitution, insertion, deletion, and they will say to you, look, it is 100% identical now.
Wait. Is 98.8% the same thing as 100%? Doesn't seem like it. So if these scientists are manipulating their data to come to 100% similarity between chimps and humans, which would be weird since it would invalidate much of biology including evolution, then why aren't they reporting that as their result?
It's actually 99% identical. By this method, I can make anything 100% identical.
Yeah, that's true, but of course that method has nothing to do with the study he's citing, because he doesn't understand the methods. The human and chimp genomes were not manipulated, and the creation of a hypothetical ancestral genome to both changes neither of them, nor does it change the percent identity numbers that would be spit out by programs like BLAST.
Literally. I can make any gene between any human and anything as 100% identical. That's why you have this banana and human being 50% similarities, because of the methods that they use. It just depends on which method that they use to come into similarities between these two different things. And you can say any amount that you want to say, 96, 95, 77, 70, whatever you like you can say.
I love that Lantern has just discovered that you can study different things with different methods, and despite the fact that they all spit back out answers with a percent sign, because they're testing different things in different ways, they get different numbers. And also, I love that his conclusion on learning this is that it's a nefarious conspiracy to undermine faith in Allah and the message he allegedly revealed to Muhammad.
Yeah, and an additional point that I want everybody to just keep in mind is that before Darwin, there was Carl Linnaeus. Carl Linnaeus was a Swedish scientist who put together taxonomy.
And let's remember, he believed in a special creation by God, which seems to be what Sabor and Lantern believe.
The way that we have it in terms of all these different organisms being put together in these categories. And he put humans and chimpanzees together because of their similarities in anatomy.
Yes, because while believing in special creation, Linnaeus wasn't a liar or an idiot. He was an intelligent scientist whose work is still cited to this day in some cases.
But he didn't believe they had a common ancestor.
That's true.
It's almost like this whole idea that humans are apes and nest within the great ape family is something that is obvious without a prior belief in evolution, but that evolution explains the patterns that Linnaeus observed and described but could not explain.
So it's pretty bloody obvious that things are similar, but that doesn't mean they have a common ancestor.
Which is why common ancestry wasn't accepted on the basis of just taxonomy. It required things like transitional forms being discovered, a mechanism or two to be discovered, and a method of inheritance to be found.
And the other thing to keep in mind, and this is something that atheists, they pull out as if it's some sort of miracle. They say, well, if humans and chimpanzees are not related, why are their genomes similar?
It's a good question, and when it occurs within the species H. sapiens, everyone sees significant genetic similarity as evidence of common ancestry. That's the whole point of things like paternity tests. If some woman came to Sabor or Lantern with a baby claiming it was theirs, you can be damn sure that they'd find a lack of genetic similarity a good reason to not have to pay child support. Similarly, look at the case of the Somerton man, a man whose body was found in Somerton Park in Adelaide in South Australia. He remained unidentified until 2022 when DNA testing was correlated with genealogical data to find out that he was a man named Charles Webb. Of course, Charles Webb never submitted his DNA to testing under that name. Instead, the DNA from the Somerton man was acquired from hair left over in a plaster cast taken of the body in hopes that someone might recognize him from the cast, since obviously his actual face would not remain intact indefinitely. So this DNA was compared to those in a genealogical database, and since DNA is in fact evidence concerning ancestry, since that's, how you get your DNA, his family was identified.
And the answer to that is, why wouldn't their genomes be similar? Because they are anatomically similar.
Remember that Sabor and Lantern were complaining about convergent evolution, where animals with superficially similar anatomies had very different origins? That's why. He knows why. But further, there are even more reasons. Let's say humans and chimps were created by God with maximally similar genomes due to their similar anatomy. In terms of neutral variation, we wouldn't be able to recover evidence of common ancestry when comparing humans and chimps to an outgroup, like gorillas or orangutans. And that's exactly what we find. The fact that humans and chimps share neutral variation with each other, that they do not share with gorillas, is as close to proof positive of sharing common ancestry as it is possible to have. This is exactly the kind of evidence that is uncontroversial within Homo sapiens and directly contradicts separate ancestry.
We would expect their genomes to be similar.
Absolutely.
Yes, but the specific ways in which we can predict both similarity and differences based on common ancestry or separate ancestry are different, and we can test for them. And as we've already seen, that's true for the whole order of primates, and when it's tested, we find stronger support for common ancestry than I've ever found in any statistic test I've ever encountered before. The chances of separate ancestry are so low that they are way beyond the level of human comprehension.
It is the same, what I was saying before about the vestigial organs, right? It is already the assumption that evolution is true.
No.
Again, homology as a concept predates the acceptance of evolution and goes all the way back to before common ancestry was accepted, and to the time when separate ancestry was the default assumption in biology.
And the organ can be only useful if it is for survival and reproduction.
I mean, yeah, basically. After this, he reads an ayah from the Quran in Arabic. I cut the Arabic out as virtually none of my audience speaks Arabic, and I don't buy into the idea that it only counts in Arabic. Arabic is a language like any other, and it isn't a special untranslatable language.
Allah says in these animals you have beauty. I can accept with you that they're completely useless for survival and reproduction, and still there's a purpose.
I would love to see Lantern's example of a beautiful feature on an animal that's useless for both survival and reproduction. Who wants to bet that if he tries, he just gives an example of something that's actually useful for reproduction, because he doesn't know that sexual selection is a thing?
Purpose is beauty. Allah created it in that way, for the beauty, for them to look more beautiful.
You mean like a peacock tail that's actually there to attract mates? Or how about the bright colors of a monarch butterfly that are actually there to signal to predators that the insect is poisonous?
For them to look more amazing. So even if I were to steel man their argument and accept that they're not useful for survival and reproduction, we can find an alternative explanation, right?
Except that the alternative explanation of Allah likes pretty animals has neither explanatory nor predictive power. But things like signaling of danger, sexual selection, and Batesian mimicry have both. So this is no more an explanation than saying Allah just likes fire is a better explanation for fire than the oxygen theory of fire.
Yeah, and also I just wanted to add a beautiful point related to what you said, because what you said is absolutely beautiful.
Apparently Sabor thinks that saying some of the stupidest shit I've heard since Mudfossil U is beautiful. I have now lost what respect I had for Sabor, which I'll grant wasn't a lot, but it wasn't nothing. I'm really tired of being disappointed by creationists. Next thing you know, Peter or Todd Wood is going to let me down.
When it comes down to the points that they're making, they cross over from biology into theology.
Not any more than any other science. Theology is, as the name implies, the study of who God is and what he does and how he interacts with the world. At most, science can say that God is not a necessary hypothesis for particular parts of the world to be explained. Just like Einstein's theory of relativity means that we do not need to invoke God to explain the motions of galaxies, stars, planets, and moons, the theory of evolution says that we do not need to invoke God to explain the biodiversity on this planet. It has nothing to say about whether the Quran is the eternal book of God. It has nothing to say about if Muhammad is God's messenger. It has nothing to say about whether Muhammad was having a seizure or being visited by the angel Jibril during Laylatul Qadr, or his subsequent revelations. It has nothing to say about whether you should eat pork or drink alcohol. It has nothing to say about how many times you should pray each day or which direction you should face. It has nothing to say about how to avoid Jahannam or how to get to Jannah. It has nothing to say about whether the fitra is real and calling all humans to Islam or not.
As I say, it's a quick one. I could have gotten more detail, but I don't want to bore the people, you know?
Oh, I wouldn't consider myself to be bored. Sure, my brain might be leaking out of all the orifices in my head, but it's not because I'm bored.
I don't want to.
Yeah, but you know, these presentations, Muhammad, they're very important because whenever we're talking to atheists, we need to have them ready. We need to have these references ready. We need
Absolutely, that's why I have them ready. Yeah.
Why? Do you think these two have a humiliation fetish or something? If that's how it is, they could just get someone to humiliate them in private rather than looking like idiots on the internet. But maybe their fetish is specifically public humiliation.
I have them ready. The links, whenever they come to you, they claim that there's random mutation. Already slap them with research showing that there's no random mutation, and then slap them with the video that I showed you, and that's the end of it, right? You don't need to debate too much with that. They come to you with the fossil record. I want people to this is a very important point. They will come to you. Where's the evidence for evolution? They will say to you the fossil record.
They sure will.
You just say the word. What in the fossil record is evidence for what you say? That's what you're supposed to ask.
Let's see, in no particular order, Scutellosaurus, Scleromochlus, Lagasuchus, Tiktaalik, Hynerpeton, Acanthostega, Sphecomirma, Protoroctopus, Picaya, Wiwaxia, Australopithecus, Sahelanthropus, Hyracotherium, Hesperocyon, Archaeopteryx, Mesohippus, Pesosiren, Pakicetus, Indohyus, Dorudon, Basilosaurus, Caudipteryx, Confuciusornis, Microraptor, and Measis. That's 25 examples of transitional forms that were predicted by common ancestry. The counter-prediction is that we should not find such fossils if separate ancestry is true, and they are indeed evidence of evolution. It's far from all of them, though.
You've got to peel one layer back. Say it to them. What is evidence? They'll say, oh, these things in museums, which is all Lucy and all of Homo, all of these things. In the National Museum, I think here in London, they're showing you all of these pelves of the whale.
I mean, yeah, Lucy and fossil whales are part of it, and nothing Lantern has said has approached an explanation for these fossils that in any way detracts from their status as transitional forms, which are in fact predicted only by evolution, making the mere existence of each of them prima facie evidence of evolution.
And they say to you these are vestigial organs.
Well, modern whale pelvies are vestigial, but those of, say, Pakicetus or Ambulocetus are clearly not, which is again more evidence of whales evolving from land-dwelling ancestors.
This nonsense I'm showing you, this is what they're using in these magazines, these fictional type of skeletons that they're putting there, right?
The skeletons are in no way fictional, which Lantern would know if he bothered to learn how to read paleontology papers and then bothered to do so. I did. I've also been to the storage room at a museum where fossils that are not on display are kept and seen fossils with camels, turtles, dinosaurs, and more. That's something Lantern could do, although he'd probably have to do so under supervision, and in some cases, might want to be careful because some fossils are dangerously radioactive. Yet again, we have a case where instead of actually doing the work of investigating his claim, Lantern simply lies. Let's read the meaning of Quran 39:3.
Indeed, the pure religion is only for Allah, for those who take protectors besides Allah, saying, we worship them only so they may bring us closer to Allah. Surely Allah will judge between them regarding what they differed about. Indeed, Allah does not guide he who is a liar and disbeliever.
I don't know, it sounds a whole lot like Lantern is in danger of losing the guidance of Allah because he was lying.
And they come to the layman who doesn't know anything about evolution. They come with this nonsense. So you have to be prepared as believers, you know?
Was that Lantern admitting to being a layman who knows nothing about evolution? That might be the most honest thing he's ever said, if that's what he meant.
Okay, let's move on, inshallah.
Yes, let's move on. And inshallah, I'll be back next time with the next episode of this, because we'll save the so-called rational problems with the theory for next time, which should be the final episode, inshallah. Alhamdulillah, it's time for me to get out of here for now. If you liked this video, please be sure to hit the like button and tell me what you liked in the comments. If you hated the video, then please hit dislike and tell me what the problem was in the comments. Fair warning though, if you express your problem rudely, I'll probably match that energy. Either way, make sure to subscribe and have notifications turned on so that you're always notified when I have more content. Ma'asalama wa ismi Dapper Dinosaur. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Benthoven, Phil Guevara, Tapioca Weasel, Whispers, Denny5252, Eleron Teller, Horseflesh, Ian Chen, Landon Knoll, Mabbity Babbity, Monkey They Them, Robert Carpenter, Sphincter of Doom, Vollus, Eddie McCoy, Ita V, and Strawberry Vane. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.
How